You can't just pave your driveway without approval. That's a direct violation.
This is my property. I'll do what I want. Your rules are ridiculous.
I never thought I'd wake up one morning and find the street outside my house no longer belonged to me or to any of the neighbors. It sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly what the HOA did. It was a bright Monday morning, the kind where the sun looks too cheerful for the problems waiting in your mailbox. My wife, Emily, handed me an envelope with that all-too-familiar HOA logo stamped on the corner. I could already feel the headache forming. I tore it open and read the words that made my jaw drop. Effective immediately, the association has taken jurisdiction over Maple Drive. All access, maintenance, and usage rights are now under HOA authority. In simple terms, they had taken our entire street. At first, I laughed. It had to be some kind of typo, right? Streets belong to the city, not to a bunch of retirees sitting on a power trip in their HOA clubhouse. But as I kept reading, my stomach twisted. The letter went on to explain that the HOA had struck a deal with the local council, buying the rights to maintain the road for the community's safety and standards. But here's the kicker, every homeowner was now responsible for paying road usage fees. That meant if I parked my truck in front of my house? Fee. If Emily's sister came over to visit? Fee. If my kids rode their bikes in the street? You guessed it, fee. I stormed outside, letter in hand, and saw neighbors gathered in confusion. Mr. Harris, the old man across the street, waved his letter at me like it was a white flag. They can't do this, can they? He asked, voice shaking. Before I could answer, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped the HOA president herself, Margaret Steele, a woman who carried herself like she owned not just the neighborhood but the entire world. She wore her usual stiff blazer, dark sunglasses, and a smug smile that made my blood boil. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice dripping with fake cheer. "As of today, Maple Drive is under HOA management. This will ensure our community remains safe, beautiful, and compliant." The crowd erupted with questions. "You can't just take the street. This is theft. What about our taxes?" Margaret raised a manicured hand, silencing us. "The decision is final." The board voted unanimously. Any vehicles parked without proper HOA permits will be towed. Consider this your warning. And just like that, she climbed back into her SUV and drove off, leaving behind a stunned silence. My wife turned to me, fury in her eyes. "They can't get away with this, Jack. Not this time." But deep down, I knew Margaret always found a way to bend the rules in her favor. And this time, she had taken more than just control, she had taken our freedom. I clenched the letter so tightly it crumpled in my fist. At that moment, I made a silent vow, if the HOA thought they could take my road without asking, they had no idea what kind of war they'd just started. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. Maple Drive had always been the kind of place you saw in glossy real estate brochures, clean sidewalks, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes under the shade of oak trees. On the surface, it looked like the perfect slice of suburban paradise. But beneath that picture-perfect exterior lurked something darker, the HOA. When Emily and I bought our house 5 years ago, we knew the HOA existed, but we thought it was harmless. A few rules here, a few dues there, it seemed manageable. But Margaret Steele, the HOA president, made sure no one ever forgot who truly ran this neighborhood. Margaret wasn't just strict, she was ruthless. She fined families for leaving their garbage cans out for too many hours. She sent warning letters if someone's grass grew a little too high. One time, she even forced a family to repaint their entire house because the shade of beige wasn't community approved. Still, most of us swallowed our frustration because we wanted peace. But now, after Margaret announced that the HOA had taken control of the entire street, the peace was gone. At dinner that night, Emily was fuming. She stabbed her fork into her salad like it was Margaret's heart. "This isn't just about money, Jack," she said. "It's about control. She wants to own us." Our kids, Mia and Daniel, looked confused. "Does this mean we can't play in the street anymore?" Mia asked softly. I forced a smile. "Of course you can, sweetheart. This is still our neighborhood. But deep inside, I wasn't sure. The next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to my front door. Reminder: unauthorized parking on Maple Drive will result in immediate towing and a $250 fine. HOA permits available upon request. I wasn't the only one. Every single house on the block had the same notice. Margaret's authority had officially taken root overnight. Later that day, as I was washing my truck, my neighbor Linda walked over. She was a sweet lady in her late 50s who lived alone ever since her husband passed away. Linda was always friendly, the type who baked cookies for the kids and watered your plants if you went on vacation. She held up her orange notice with a shaky hand. "Jack, I can't afford this. I'm on a fixed income. What am I supposed to do if they find me?" Before I could answer, another voice cut in. It was Gary, the vice president of the HOA and Margaret's right-hand man. He strutted down the sidewalk in his black uniform polo with the HOA emblem stitched on the chest. He carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Linda, rules are rules," Gary said smugly. "If you can't keep up, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." I stepped between them, my blood boiling. "Back off, Gary. She's lived here longer than you've been alive." Gary smirked. "Then she should know better. We're not running a charity. The board voted on this road takeover, and if you don't like it, you can take it up with Margaret." Linda looked like she might cry, and Gary walked off, jotting something on his clipboard. I had a bad feeling it was my name. That evening, Emily suggested we attend the next HOA meeting to confront Margaret directly. "If we don't push back, they'll walk all over us," she said. So that's exactly what we did. The clubhouse was packed when we arrived. Neighbors filled every chair, clutching their orange notices, whispering angrily. Margaret sat at the front table like a queen on her throne, Gary beside her, tapping his pen like a drumbeat. Margaret adjusted her glasses and spoke into the microphone. "The road takeover is in the best interest of this community. With HOA management, we can ensure safety, reduce crime, and maintain order. Anyone against this decision is free to file an appeal in writing, which may or may not be considered." The room erupted. People shouted over each other. One man yelled about how he already paid city taxes for road maintenance. Another woman demanded to know where the money was really going. I raised my voice above the chaos. "You can't just steal a public street and charge us to use it. This isn't about safety, it's about greed." Margaret's lips curved into a smile that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you choose your words carefully. The HOA has full authority now. Resistance will only make things harder, for you." The room fell silent. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about permits or fines. This was about power, and Margaret had more of it than any of us realized. And as I walked out of that meeting with Emily and Linda by my side, I knew one thing for certain: if Margaret thought she could intimidate me into silence, she was dead wrong. But what I didn't know was how far she was willing to go, and how much worse things were about to get. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke to the sound of a tow truck outside my window. My heart sank. I threw on my boots and rushed outside, only to see Gary grinning beside the massive tow rig. The driver had already hooked Linda's old sedan to the back of the truck. Linda stood on her porch in her robe, pleading desperately. "Please, I have the permit application, I just haven't mailed it yet," she cried. Gary crossed his arms. "Too late. Rules are rules." I couldn't stand by and watch. "Unhook her car," I snapped, stepping between them. Gary smirked. "Or what? You'll get fined too? You should be careful, Jack. You're already on Margaret's radar." I clenched my fists, but I knew if I hit him, the HOA would drag me into court. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started filming. "Go ahead. Let's see how the internet feels about you stealing cars from elderly women." The tow driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, he unhooked Linda's car and muttered, "Not worth the trouble." He drove off, leaving Gary fuming. That small victory should have felt good, but it only made Margaret angrier. That evening, another letter appeared in my mailbox. Violation, unauthorized interference with HOA enforcement. Fine, $500. Pay within 14 days. Emily nearly tore the letter in half. They're trying to bury us in fines until we give up. I nodded grimly. Then it's time to fight back. The following week, the HOA called another board meeting. This time, I came prepared. I brought every neighbor who was fed up with Margaret's dictatorship. The clubhouse was packed wall to wall, tension so thick you could taste it. Margaret opened the meeting with her usual smug smile. I trust everyone is adjusting to our new road management policies? The crowd erupted with angry voices. Someone shouted, "We're not paying for this." Another yelled, "You're robbing us." I stood and raised my voice. Margaret, you've gone too far. You're abusing your power. None of us agreed to this road takeover, and we demand answers. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes cold. The board voted. The majority rules. Linda shouted from the back, "That's a lie. You never even asked us." The room exploded in arguments. Neighbors stood, pointing fingers, demanding proof. Gary banged his fist on the table, shouting for order. I stepped closer to Margaret. Show us the paperwork. Show us the contract with the city that gave you this road. Her smile faltered, just for a second. That information is confidential. Gasps filled the room. I pressed harder. If it's real, why hide it? Unless, of course, you don't want us to see what you're really up to. The board scrambled, papers shuffling, voices rising. Margaret finally snapped. Enough. The HOA's authority is absolute. If you continue to challenge us, there will be consequences. The room fell silent. Her words weren't just a warning, they were a threat. Emily squeezed my hand. Jack, don't let her scare you. I looked around at my neighbors, faces tired, scared, but hopeful. They were counting on me to stand up. I turned back to Margaret. You don't own us. You don't own this road. And I won't stop until the truth comes out. Her eyes narrowed. Then you've just made yourself my number one problem. That night, things got even worse. Around midnight, I was woken by flashing lights outside. Police cruisers lined Maple Drive. Officers were going door to door, knocking, waking up families. I stepped outside, confused. One officer approached me. Sir, we've received reports that several vehicles parked on this road are in violation of new HOA restrictions. We've been asked to assist in enforcement. My jaw dropped. You're kidding. The HOA doesn't have the right to send you here. The officer shrugged. We're just responding to complaints. Behind him, I saw tow trucks moving in again, this time aiming for multiple cars at once. Panic spread down the street as neighbors begged the officers to stop. Kids cried. Dogs barked. I grabbed the officer's arm. This is harassment. You can't just take our cars because some HOA queen says so. He gave me a pitying look. Take it up with your board, sir. We're just here to keep the peace. But there was no peace. Not anymore. As I stood there watching chaos unfold, I realized Margaret wasn't just flexing her authority, she was declaring war. And if I didn't find a way to stop her, she would ruin every single one of us. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger, something darker, was happening behind the scenes. The night of flashing lights on Maple Drive felt like a bad dream. By morning, 4 cars had been towed, including Linda's, despite my attempt to defend her the day before. Neighbors were furious, exhausted, and scared. Everyone whispered about Margaret, about how she could possibly have the power to pull the police into our street drama. Emily and I sat at the kitchen table with a pile of violation letters in front of us. Each one slapped with outrageous fines, $250 for interference, $500 for parking obstruction, and now, a new $1,10004 for threatening HOA staff. Emily rubbed her temples. They're doubling the fines every time. This is financial warfare. I clenched my jaw. And they're winning unless we figure out how Margaret pulled this off. That afternoon, I decided to dig deeper. I headed to City Hall to request public records. After hours of waiting, I finally got my hands on the so-called road transfer paperwork. The moment I opened the file, I knew something was off. The signatures looked rushed, sloppy, almost forged. The city council member's name had been stamped instead of signed. And at the bottom was a notarization from someone I recognized immediately, Margaret Steele's own cousin. I snapped a photo and sent it to Emily. She forged this. She's been lying to all of us. But Margaret wasn't stupid. She knew people would start asking questions. That night, when I returned home, a police cruiser was parked in my driveway. An officer stepped out, holding yet another violation notice. This is a cease and desist, Mr. Carter. The HOA has filed a complaint that you're harassing their board members. Any further interference, and we'll have to charge you with disorderly conduct. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So Margaret commits fraud, and I'm the criminal? The officer didn't answer. He just handed me the notice and walked away. Emily grabbed my arm. Jack, she's setting you up. She's trying to break you first so no one else dares to fight her. The next HOA meeting was even more hostile than before. I brought copies of the forged paperwork, ready to expose Margaret. The room buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in, exhausted from fines and tows. I stood up and held the papers high. This is the so-called contract Margaret claims gave her the road. But it's a lie. The signatures are fake. The notary is her own family member. She stole Maple Drive from us with fraud. Gasps filled the room. Linda clutched her chest. Others shouted in anger. Margaret didn't flinch. She leaned into her microphone, her voice calm and icy. Mr. Carter is spreading dangerous misinformation. I'll remind you all that slander is a punishable offense. These baseless accusations will not be tolerated. I slammed the papers onto the table. Then explain this. Why does every fine double the moment someone challenges you? Why did the police suddenly appear on our street the same day you signed this bogus contract? Why are your relatives the ones approving these documents? For a brief second, Margaret's mask cracked. Her eyes narrowed, and her jaw twitched. Then she smiled a cold, venomous smile. You think you're clever, Jack. But you have no idea who you're up against. Keep pushing, and you'll lose more than money. The room went silent. People looked at each other nervously. Some were scared. But others, Linda, the Harris family, even a few younger neighbors, looked fired up. They weren't just scared anymore. They were angry. That night, I sat on my porch with Emily, staring down Maple Drive. A dozen cars lined the curb, most with bright orange warning stickers slapped on their windshields. It looked like a battlefield marked for destruction. Emily touched my shoulder. You've got proof, Jack. If we take this to court, Margaret's finished. I nodded slowly. Yeah, but court takes time. By then, she'll have drained half the neighborhood dry with fines. She frowned. Then what do we do? I looked at the street, at the cars, at the orange warnings glowing under the streetlights. And then it hit me, the craziest, boldest idea I'd ever had. If she wants to control this road so badly, I said quietly, then maybe it's time we take away the very thing she's using against us. Emily blinked. What do you mean? I grinned, the first real grin I'd had in days. I mean, if she wants to vanish our cars with her tow trucks, maybe it's time I vanish every single one of theirs first. I'd never considered myself the kind of man to seek revenge. But as I sat on that porch, staring at the glowing orange stickers plastered on nearly every neighbor's car, something inside me shifted. Margaret thought she could strip us of our road, our rights, our dignity, and I wasn't about to let her win. The next day, I got to work. First, I called an old friend from my college days, Mike, who now ran a towing and storage company just outside town. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I explained what the HOA was doing, he didn't hesitate. Sounds like a shakedown, he said. You want me to bring a couple of trucks? Not just trucks, I told him. I need storage space. A lot of it. By the following weekend, everything was in place. Under cover of night, Mike and I moved quietly up and down Maple Drive. Car by car, we towed every vehicle with an HOA permit sticker, Gary's black SUV, the treasurer's shiny BMW, even Margaret's prized white Lexus parked neatly in front of her perfectly trimmed lawn. Each one disappeared into Mike's secure lot on the edge of town. No damage, no theft, just a relocation. By sunrise, the HOA board woke up to find Maple Drive empty of their precious machines. The irony wasn't lost on me. For weeks, they'd threatened us with tows, with fines, with confiscations. Now they were the ones left stranded, powerless, staring at their driveways in shock. The fallout was immediate. That morning, Margaret stormed down the street in a fury, barking orders into her phone. Gary ran from house to house, demanding to know who was responsible. Neighbors watched from porches, barely hiding their smiles. This is vandalism. Margaret screamed, standing in the middle of Maple Drive. Whoever did this will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I stepped out of my house, calm as could be. What's the matter, Margaret? Didn't expect to wake up to an empty street? Her eyes burned into me. You. I shrugged. Hey, I didn't tow anything illegally. Those cars are perfectly safe. Just relocated. Funny how it feels when someone takes your property without asking, isn't it? Gasps and chuckles rippled through the crowd of neighbors. For once, Margaret wasn't in control. Gary stomped toward me. You're finished, Carter. We'll fine you into the ground for this. I held up my phone, where the photos of the forged contract glowed brightly. No, Gary. You're finished. I've already sent copies of this paperwork to a lawyer and the local news station. By tomorrow, the whole town will know how Margaret stole this road. The color drained from Margaret's face. She tried to regain her composure. Lies. You have no proof. Oh, I've got plenty, I cut her off. And when the city sees your cousin's notary stamp, they'll open an investigation so fast you won't know what hit you. The crowd erupted. Neighbors began shouting, demanding refunds, threatening to sue. Linda stepped forward, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. You've bled us dry for years, Margaret. No more. We're done being your prisoners. Margaret turned in circles, desperate to regain control, but it was gone. The power she'd clutched so tightly had slipped through her fingers. And then, as if on cue, police cruisers rolled onto Maple Drive again. Everyone went tense. Had Margaret called them to arrest me? But when the officers stepped out, their tone was different this time. We've received complaints about fraudulent documents submitted by the HOA, one of them said, holding up a file. We're here to ask some questions. Margaret's face went pale. For the first time, she had no smug smile, no cutting remark. She looked small, cornered, trapped. Gary sputtered, "This is a mistake, Margaret wouldn't." The officer cut him off. "We'll sort it out downtown." "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." Gasps filled the air as Margaret was led toward the cruiser. She tried one last time to lash out. "This neighborhood will fall apart without me. You'll regret this." But no one believed her anymore. As the police car drove away, Maple Drive erupted in cheers. Neighbors hugged, kids laughed, and Linda grabbed my hand with tears streaming down her face. "Jack, you saved us." I looked around at the smiling faces, the sense of relief washing over everyone. For the first time in years, Maple Drive truly belonged to us again. But even as the celebration began, I raised my voice, addressing the crowd. This isn't over. Margaret will try to slither her way out of this. The HOA might even replace her with someone just as bad. We need to decide, are we going to keep letting people like this control us, or are we finally going to take our neighborhood back for good? Silence fell. Neighbors exchanged looks, nodding slowly. For the first time, they were ready to stand together. and I knew the real battle wasn't just about cars or roads, it was about freedom. For the first time in weeks, Maple Drive felt alive again. Kids rode their bikes without parents hovering nervously nearby. Neighbors chatted freely in driveways, smiling as though a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The fear that had hung over our street like a storm cloud was gone. Margaret was facing legal trouble over the forged road contract. Rumors swirled that she could be charged with fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. Gary and the rest of the board went quiet, suddenly unavailable for comment. Without Margaret barking orders, their power collapsed overnight. But victory didn't mean the fight was over. The HOA was still there, its structure intact, waiting for the next power-hungry leader to take control. And that's when something incredible happened. Our community came together. A week later, we gathered in the clubhouse, not for one of Margaret's staged board meetings, but for our own town hall. Every seat was filled. People who'd barely spoken to each other in years now stood shoulder to shoulder, united by everything we'd been through. Linda, who had once been timid and afraid, was the first to speak. "We can't let this happen again. We need accountability. We need a voice." Cheers filled the room. I stood and cleared my throat. We've all seen what happens when power is left unchecked. Margaret thought she owned us, and she nearly destroyed everything we built here. But if we work together, we can rebuild this neighborhood into something better. The vote that followed was unanimous: dissolve the current HOA board and form a new committee made up of everyday residents, not just people chasing power. For the first time, it wasn't Margaret or Gary deciding our future. It was all of us. Later that night, as Emily and I sat on our porch, I finally let myself relax. The air was cool, the street quiet, and for once, it truly felt like home again. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "You really did it, Jack," she whispered. "You stood up to them." I shook my head. We all did. This wasn't just me, it was the whole neighborhood finally saying enough is enough. Just then, Linda walked by with a plate of cookies for the kids, waving and smiling. A week ago, she was terrified of losing her home. Now, she looked 10 years younger. That sight alone made every sleepless night worth it. But deep down, I knew Margaret wouldn't disappear quietly. People like her never do. Maybe she'd try to sue, maybe she'd try to worm her way back into power, or maybe she'd move to another neighborhood to start the same nightmare over again. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just our story. This happens in neighborhoods across the country. HOAs abusing power, homeowners fighting back, families caught in the middle. I looked at the camera in my mind's eye, the way I wanted to tell it to the world. "So now I ask you," I said aloud, as if speaking to every neighbor, every viewer, every person who'd ever felt powerless against an unfair rule. If this happened to you, if your HOA tried to take your road, your freedom, and your peace, would you fight back, or would you pay the fine and keep quiet? I let the question hang in the air, heavy and real. Because I knew that's what mattered most. Not just what we did on Maple Drive, but what others would do when faced with the same choice. That night, as I lay in bed with Emily beside me and the kids finally asleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The road outside was still Maple Drive, but now it belonged to us again. And no matter what happened next, we'd never let anyone take it away without a fight. Because sometimes, the only way to protect what's yours is to vanish every last car that tries to stand in your way.